All right, hello everybody. Hello. Morning. Welcome to crowdsourcing with Google. Thanks for coming. So, as you know, it's going to be pretty hands-on through the day. So I will kind of get through the preamble relatively quickly, and then we'll have more time to play around with Google Earth and other Google tools. So I sent you a few things over the days here, the most important of which right now is, I think, the link that I sent out this morning. And so this has some information in it, but also, most importantly, it has lots of links to the stuff we'll be working on today, and a wide range of other examples that are quote-unquote live, meaning they are the sheets and the Google Docs and the slides that have been filled in by students within the last year. So anyway, that's already to this document, but taking a step back, what is this and why am I here? So let's start with an easy win here. Who is familiar with the idea of the internet? Okay, that is percolated through almost everyone in the classroom. Who has used any of the suite of Google Docs-like tools? Okay, I think it's just almost everybody. So that would be Google Sheets, Docs, Slides, Fusion tables, maybe a few other fit into that suite. I'm not exactly sure what the boundary is. So for me, I started teaching here 2 years ago, and this began as a bit of a personal crutch, because what I was always terrible at when I was an undergrad student was free-form discussion about ambiguous ideas. And that's something I'm trying to work on. But in the meantime, getting students active in these sorts of kind of structured, research-oriented activities has helped me to communicate better with the students, have them engage with my material in a kind of an active learning setting without necessarily having me stand up here worrying about long, awkward silences. So, I mainly teach geospatial courses, so this Google Earth stuff fits in nicely, but then I also have the more general education stuff where I'm also using these tools, such as a complex problems course on the Earth's carrying capacity and the alteration thereof, and then some general environmental science courses where I'm also trying to get people into the geospatial pipeline a little bit using some of these tools. So a few advantages of having these in the classroom is it gets everyone involved all at the same time. So you don't need to just worry about having your 3 or 4 dominant discussion participators dominating the discussion. You can tell that everyone has a row in the spreadsheet. They're entering in data. They're doing their analyses, etc. I've found that some of these activities involve comparison and competition. That is a useful motivator. And then most recently, I used it at the end of my complex problems class, some Google Sheets to gather student feedback in real time, generate some charts about what they liked and didn't like about a class, and then discuss it right there while they were looking at their results. So I'll show a few of those examples in a little bit towards the end, but I would really just like to get into trying a couple of my more tried and true activities, starting with one on urbanization. So let's see. So to give you some context here, urban remote sensing is my PhD kind of study area, meaning using satellite and aerial imagery to identify and measure the health and status of vegetation in urban areas. So increasingly important as more people are living in these areas, urban areas are getting hotter, drier, etc. We want to see what's going on in terms of the ecosystem. So one way I translate some of this kind of more complicated research into something that you do in the classroom is using a Google Earth activity. So as a preamble to this, I'm not going to do all this with you, but just to set the stage, I do two main things. One is give a 20-minute lecture on the definitions of urban areas. So urban as defined by political boundary, as defined by metropolitan statistical area, and then most importantly for us, as defined by urbanized extent, meaning if you look at it and it looks urban, well then it's probably urban, particularly from a satellite imagery from above. So they know kind of the idea of what they're looking for as far as urban extent, and hopefully this will come back. Okay. And then the other side of it is, how do you get familiar with looking at imagery? This is probably not something that they've done a lot of. Everyone has used Google Maps at some level, but not everyone has turned on the satellite imagery button. And so what I do there is we actually do a half-an-hour activity with some pre-selected interesting sites from Google Earth. And we have the students do some interpretation of what they're seeing. And so I give them this website as a primer to say, what are the clues that you can use to understand what you're looking at in imagery? So it's factors, and these are, you should kind of keep these in mind, because you'll have to figure out what is the boundary of urban and non-urban in our activity. And so what are the clues that you use? Well, shape. These are kind of obvious when you think about them, but you look down at something from above, the shape of that jumps out. The shape of those oxbow lakes jumps out at you as a main clue. Pattern. Are those trees in structured rows, or are they kind of random, indicating plantation versus natural forestry? The size of something. Are we looking at big highways versus feeder streets? Tone and color, is that a lake versus a beach? Shadowing, this one's an important one in an urban context, giving you an idea of structure. So higher stuff is going to be provide more shadows than lower stuff. Texture, this is a big one. The context. What is, if you're looking at something, you don't know exactly what it is. The example I use is a lineup of taxi cabs at JFK Airport. But if you're just looking at the taxis, it's just this weird yellow line of blobs. But if you zoom out and you see that, oh, there's airplanes over here, there's a terminal here, then you say, okay, that line of yellow blobs is probably the taxi lineup. So spatial context is important. And then another key thing for today is just time. We'll be looking at multi-date imagery of urbanization over time, with a goal of mapping the change in a fast-growing region. So we start with this, we spend some more time on it than we will today, and then we jump into our actual activity. So let's just give it a shot here. So hopefully some or all of you have had a chance to at least download Google Earth and install it. I do try to provide videos for people in advance of class, like the one that I sent for you on YouTube. So why don't you go ahead and open up Google Earth. We'll give a minute there, and you're welcome to just work with a partner. But of course, one of the main goals here is to collect as much data as possible in this activity. So the more computers we have operating, the better. Yeah. Karen.
If someone did not pre-register for this session, is there like a link that other people have?
Oh yeah. Let's see.
This will be a test of your live action skills.
Yep. There's a lot of things that go wrong, and so I'm used to it.
So you have to download it with
I just sent you the link, but you can search for download Google Earth.
Yeah.
So I downloaded it and it just created a drive on something. Yeah, me too. Oh, you have to.
We're talking for Google Earth, right?
Yeah, you click, you should install, you have mine. Yeah.
How many people have Google Earth open? Okay, we're mostly getting there. So I'm going to
Got it. Thank
push.
you.
All right, excellent.
Do you find
So everyone except for the person who's downloading it right now, but I trust you can catch up.
it's an application?
Okay, so how many of you have used Google Earth specifically before? Okay, we got a substantial attrition there. Not surprising because you can do most of the same stuff just in Google Maps online. So there's rarely a point to getting Google Earth unless you are interested in more measurement and information gathering, or you're a remote sensing GIS nerd like some of us in this room. And so if you saw the video, I showed a couple of the main pieces of functionality that are useful, but I will show those again right now. And so given that we're going to focus on urbanization, I will go to an example city that has had some good urbanization over the last few years. So you can enter a city into your search bar there. This is not the city that we'll be recording ourselves. And Vegas is useful both because of rapid urbanization, but also because of that it's surrounded by desert. And so it gives you a visual contrast between urban and not urban, and it's easy to delineate the growth. So one of the cool things about, maybe the coolest thing, I don't know, open for debate, about Google Earth is this show historical imagery button. So this is something you cannot do online. And so you click on that button, and then you see this slider bar up here. And all of these little hash marks are the years for which there's imagery availability in this extent, in this data frame that I'm looking at right now. So the fact that you can see all of these little hash marks here between 1984 and 2016 means that I'm at a level that's covered by the Landsat satellite. So Landsat satellite has been taking pictures of every point on Earth since 1984, every 16 days. And so there's a huge wealth of imagery available. However, if I zoom in a lot further to look at high resolution data, the coverage gets a lot spottier because you're reliant on whether a plane flew over and took pictures at that time. So you can see that dense coverage doesn't start until about 2001, when we had high-resolution satellite data, commercial satellites begin to take pictures like Iconos and GeoEye. So that's just sort of FYI. We're going to be working zoomed out far enough to where all that Landsat imagery is available. So we'll have data every year. So that's the historical imagery. The other functionality that I introduced was drawing polygons. And so that's this button here, this Add Polygon button. And I'm going to zoom back. Let's see, I'm going to go back to 1984 in Vegas here when it was just a wee shadow of its current self. So what we want to do here, the whole goal in this urbanization is to say how big was the urban extent in 1984, and then we'll measure it every 5 years afterward to demonstrate patterns of growth. And then in class I'd relate this to kind of definitions of urbanization, but also to the ecosystem effects globally and locally of urban extent. So as this demo, I'm just going to show Vegas in 1984. So I'm going to label. This is exactly what you guys will be doing. So I'm going to label this with the year and push this off to the side. And then I'm just going to click and hold down my mouse button, and roughly based on my subjective kind of knowledge or opinion of where the urban area ends, I'm going to draw this. And we'll talk about the subjectivity elements of this later. So I drew that, and then that's fine. The other thing that I like to do is to actually see through it. So I'm going to change the style and the color to where the line is red, maybe, and it is not filled. This isn't necessary, but it's useful. So now we have this sort of mediocre extent of Vegas. Yeah, question?
Where did you change the color? color.
Are you in this?
Yeah.
Okay, so you see the style color
Yeah, okay,
right in there.
gotcha, thank you.
Do you know how to undo something?
I think the easiest way to undo is simply cancel and start over again, because
You cannot go back.
not that I'm aware of, it's just easiest to start over, because it shouldn't be, don't try to do this well, otherwise it'll take forever. We'll get enough information. This is like the utility of crowdsourcing, is everyone do a mediocre job, and the mean of all of you will be good, assuming no bias. Okay, so the other thing I would want to do in this screen before I close this out is to look at the measurement. That's the data we're collecting here. So I want to know, what is the area of the urban extent in 1984? And since we're in academia here, we'll go to square kilometers. And this is the final number that we want to know. So in 1984, according to me, 301 square kilometers for Vegas. Is everyone on board? Yeah, no, you don't need to be doing this, but any questions so far? All right, you'll have questions when you start doing it. Yeah.
How do you save this information?
I will click OK, and then, so I've got this Vegas 1984 thing over here, and then you can save place as.
To create a file,
It'll create a KML file.
and you'll be able to go back to it.
Yep,
So
it'll-
you can do screenshots and save it, you'll be able to save it, then go to the next iteration or whatever your next question is, and then you go back to, you have 2 or 3 different ways of looking at what you just did.
what do you mean by ways?
So let's say you just circled Las Vegas like this, but now I just want to circle the nightclubs. So I want to save this map, and then I want to have another map.
Yeah.
So I'll be able to use that file.
So yes, you can save, it won't be the map exactly, but it'll be the specific data layer. So you can notice in this lineup here, I've got all sorts of stuff. I've got house 1, wherever that is. I don't even know. I've got,
If you click that, okay, let's say you click on house 1, it'll take you to that visual.
let's go see where house 1 is. There's house 1. That's in AU Park.
So that's the image.
Well,
That's what you took. Okay.
that's my data from that exercise. And you'll note that there's no good imagery there, zoomed in 1984, but that's a different story. So yes, you can save all this stuff. It'll be there for you. It's pretty good to
So
go.
you're not losing the data.
How do you edit like when you made it transparent with the outline, I missed how you did that.
So that's once you're in that, you can go back to properties and then style and color.
I guess my question is, I want to get at, so you're looking at historical data on the development that's occurred in that area,
Yes,
like the urban development. That's your kind of variable that you're looking at.
that's the question,
And
yeah.
so you're looking at the growth of that, you're looking at the interaction of that with the ecosystem. Is that what you're
Ultimately,
saying?
that would be the downstream, some of the context or the, like, why is this important? Why is this important? Because an increase in impervious surface, buildings, roads, et cetera, changes the urban heat
So you'll
island
be able to
effect.
look at, okay, there were 50% more buildings from 84 to present. So that's the data you're trying to collect. You're looking at ways that you can define what urbanization is.
Yeah, how much, what is it eating, what is an urban area eating into? Is it eating into farmland? Is it eating into forest? Is it eating into desert? What is the
You
changes
have
that
acres
occurs
in there, look at, okay, urban buildings, whatever, streets, they took up that amount of the acreage.
That's right.
Okay, I get it now. I'm just trying to get a sense of, I mean, it's cool. And the coolness of it is very high level.
Yeah, so
But
I'm
I'm also
skipping,
trying to figure out what the,
I'm skipping on the context for you guys here. And I wouldn't, we can do more of the why is this important in class.
okay.
So, all right, so you've got your, I gathered that's 301 square kilometers. The last thing I would do is go to my spreadsheet, which is linked. So this is the first link that you have in the urbanization. This is the actual Google document. And I would enter in my square kilometers for 1984 right there. So we're not going to do Vegas. So I'm gonna get rid of that for right now. We're gonna do Nanjing, China instead. So I think with that, let's just do it. And there's gonna be questions and issues. But the instructions are over on the right here in the sheet. It's pretty simple. Fill in your name somewhere. Don't fight over slots here. And then you're going to fill in your area estimate in square kilometers with no units. I will know your name, so if you're doing it wrong, I will call you out. And prioritize years that a bunch of other people aren't already doing. So we want to get some information for all of these 5-year increments, which again, you will find using the slider bar up here. So 1989 is here, 1994 is here. So you don't have to do all these years, just pick some years and give them a shot. So with that, go to your search bars and type in Nanjing, China. Should look something like this. I'm in 1984, so yours may not look like this. Yours may more look like that. But Nanjing is a little trickier because it's a little more interconnected with other cities, so creating some con-urbanized areas, which also is fodder for discussion. It's surrounded by more greenery, which is more difficult to differentiate than desert is, etc. But that's the challenge. And so again, the main thing I keep reiterating is don't try too hard. Just go with your gut and draw some polygons around what you think is the urban extent of Nanjing at that time.
So the polygon is it counts only one closed polygon, or if you have several, it adds them up?
I think you can just do one. Just do one, because I'm not sure about multi-part. I'm not even sure if that's a thing.
Historical. You have to go to the first two.
Yep, so go to the historical imagery, play with your slider bar a little bit, and then do that. You're going to do that add polygon tool. So why don't you give that a shot, and I will come around and help as you need. Yep. Thank you. Yep, that was easy. Okay, so you can keep collecting data, but we have a good smattering of data collected already, and so this is where you kind of leverage your work to, well, there we go. Wow. So this is where I now go back to the data sheet and say, maybe that some numbers were too big. Okay, so but before I get there, what we're attempting to illustrate here is both the mean trend in urbanization in terms of square kilometers over time, so just overall growth, and then the dashed line is the variability in your estimates. So this is where we have a discussion about the subjectivity that goes into measuring urban extents. Usually it's not quite this wild. So that I would look back and say, okay, who said, not to name names, but who said it was 5,900 kilometers? Because that's pretty big. Susan?
No.
So I'm just going to temporarily, don't worry, temporarily delete that just to show you the change, how that brings those error bounds way down. So there may be some wildly different views on what constitutes an urban extent here. So a lot of, I think, a good take-home lesson for these techniques in general is that you've got to roll with it, and you have to have a lesson that doesn't rely on perfect results. It's got to be about the process. So yeah.
Actually, my question was specifically about urban, but I did a little exercise with a spreadsheet exercise where there was no wrong answer. The easiest way to do this analytically is to put a Google sheet into Blackboard that can each fill out
I don't do it in Blackboard, but I mean it's always a link from Blackboard, but then it's just out to Google Sheets. Right. So just for the, okay, here's one more interesting one. Someone has negative urban extent. Oops, let's see. Oh no, that's just a huge standard deviation. Yeah, I think, Susan, you do have a very interesting view on urban.
Well, isn't there a big issue in terms of the way people draw? I mean, we're looking at it visually, in terms of making this polygram. It just seems like there's a variability in terms of perception.
Exactly. So that is the point. That's why
As opposed to saying I'm giving you all 350 square miles or square kilometers, and now do your calculations based on what I've marked off.
So this is urbanization is kind of like pornography, you know, when you see it. And so people have different definitions of it, and that is the point of this exercise, is that it's going to be different for everybody. And there is even, you know, there's not like there's some magical way that's even necessarily better than a room full of students in measuring urban extent. And so capturing that variability is core. And so now you can see, you know, this would be sufficient for a little wrap-up discussion, I think, at the end, where you'd say, okay, we have this mean trend. What does this suggest about the urbanization processes in China? When did urbanization really take off in China? Yeah, late 90s, early 2000s was when it looks like it really took off. And then when does it, like, what are the reasons why the disagreement among your estimates seems to be a lot worse later on than earlier? Does anyone, why was it easy earlier on?
Because it's more condensed.
Yeah, more condensed.
More compact.
Yep.
I thought that the later years looked like it crossed the river, across some kind of barrier, it jumped somehow.
Yeah.
Further.
Yeah, it just becomes a lot more ambiguous. It starts to run into other urbanizing Chinese cities. And so defining the boundary becomes a lot trickier at that point. So that's about it for this one. Yeah, Karen.
When you use this in class, like what fraction of the students like download and use the software correctly?
Well, so I as far as downloading it, like and installing it well in advance, not very many.
Okay.
But like I also spend more time on it, and so I just make sure that everybody has it. They're in there because I use it like 5 times during the semester for various things.
So you basically just have to allow time.
Yeah. Yep.
How do you generate this?
So I won't go into the nitty-gritty details, but basically this graph, which you first of all can see is locked and protected, so nobody can mess up anything over here. But that the actual information, so comes from everything that people are entering in here. And then if you scroll down to the bottom, you can see that I've done a mean and a standard deviation for all of your estimates. So getting the variability, and then I put them together. And so this is basically constructing the graph. So the graph is based on, here's the mean line, it's this column, standard deviation year by year. And then in order to make the chart, it's mean plus standard deviation and mean minus standard deviation. So, you know, the specifics about like what data I'm quantifying and the statistics I'm using aren't necessarily the point, and you don't need to do the same things I'm doing. This is just how I roll.
But how do you generate the graph?
So that would just come, the graph is just like in regular Excel. You specify where all the data are coming from that previous sheet.
So you constructed this wasn't automated just with us right now?
I pre-constructed the calculations. Yeah, that's critical. So all people are doing now is entering in data. And so the mean and standard deviation and the graph, all of that was already set up, already tested, and already all those cells over, so all of these cells, like all of this stuff, if you were to try to edit, if any of you were to try to edit those, you wouldn't be able to, because I protected all of
So
those.
we're not looking at our data. This didn't capture what we generated.
No, it did. It did. So this is all of these numbers here are based on your entries. I set up the calculations in advance, but not the data. So yes, you made this happen. Okay, so I'm going to move on from that to, unless there are any other questions on that one right now. But we can also come back. I'll show you a few other examples. So this is what using the kind of linked Google Earth and Google Sheets is kind of on the more complicated side of what I do. But this is very pertinent to my own area, so I do this stuff a lot. But I also do a lot of sheets, docs, slides, examples that are more self-contained and more straightforward. And so I'd like us to do an example of that as well. So this one is from a kind of it's called Living on Earth, Environmental Science 250, which could be summarized as why we're all going to hell in a handbasket and what you might be able to do about it. And so one of the areas that we talk about is water. And when I was teaching this course in the spring of 2018, that was during the Cape Town water crisis, where they were nearing day zero of like actually running out of water, and it was actually pretty dramatic. And so that information, coupled with the fact that students had done a lifestyle project wherein they try to cut back their usage of water, eat less meat, just have a lower ecological footprint overall, led to this exercise of let's compare your water usage to what they are allowed to use in Cape Town. So if you want to go back to your this hands-on, this agenda document, and you can follow the link under the water use line, that will take you to something that looks like this. And so this one point I will make here is some of these exercises are nice to have names associated with them, like the Google Earth one, so I could call out specific people for putting units in their entries, so I can control the flow of data, but there's no concerns about people being uncomfortable with what they're telling you. So there's no need for anonymity there. When we're talking about how many times you flush the toilet, it gets to be borderline, and so in those cases, I don't have people enter in names. So in this case, you'll see there's no name column. All of this is just going to be where you'll enter in your data. So what the objective is here is for each person, to claim a row, and you can just claim a row by starting to enter in data into one of these slots, and you're going to say per day. This is all per day. Estimates, again, don't think too hard about it. How many times do you flush the toilet? How many minutes do you take a shower? Undergrads take shockingly long showers, by the way. Some people, 30 minutes twice a day. Yeah, I know, it sounded like it was like everyone's relaxation and rest.
They worry about how they.
I've got a formula showing up. You have to replace the formula.
Wait,
It shows up with a
if you just,
equal NA open close.
so just,
bracket.
you just put your cursor on that and just write over it.
Got it. Don't open.
So just enter in numbers. And so for washing machine loads, you can make it a decimal. So it could be 0.3 loads per day or something. Think about how many you do in a week and divide by 7. Same with dishwasher loads, which is the last one. So otherwise, everybody go ahead and enter that information in. And so while that's happening, what we're going to see generated is information about how much water you would use with old technology and how much water you would use with new technology. And of course, these numbers can lead to discussion as well about what are the assumptions, how many people actually use all new technology, what is the new technology. But suffice it to say for right now that there is a pretty massive difference in efficiency between the new tech and the old tech.
With someone else.
Yeah, so you can easily have your data changed. There's no protection against that. So you can go and get them back if you need to. So if you're operating in multiple rows, that's not the end of the world. All of this is just again going to
Somebody's stepping on row 9.
Huh?
So choose a different row, because somebody's stepping on row 9 twice.
Yeah, so if you entered in the washing machine load of 3 per day, maybe
Even when I.
3 per day,
Off day, it was like once per day.
maybe it's
Plus,
0.3
it was
per
like
day,
once per day plus once per week.
or you have a lot of kids. Yeah.
Oh, do I have to count my kids too, or?
They do the laundry. You should be applauded for that.
I just don't like this for a health risk class on how much water everybody drank today.
Which is an interesting counter argument, because you want them to drink more water.
Well, just, you know, their fluid intake, exposure analysis, how much.
So you'll see that the output starts to generate here, and we can get some, so this is another simple chart that you're creating with the data here of an overall summary. So based on the old technology, we've got gallons per day distribution, so between 90 and about 250. And using new tech, you can see the range is hugely different. So a big impact between 30 and 100 gallons per day with let's see. So this also calculates averages. So you can see 181 down to 69, and you think, oh, good. Congratulations to us. We're doing a great job. And then you compare that to just the early stage restrictions in Cape Town, which was 13 gallons a day. And so this can start to provoke discussions of, wait, whoa, maybe this isn't just about having better technology. This is about some sort of fundamental limitation. Where do we really need to cut back? What can we actually do? And for this, we couple this with a few videos of what people did in South Africa. So, taking a shower in a bucket or with a bucket under you so that you can collect that water, dump that water in your toilet, use that water to water your plants, etc. So they get exposed to a lot of the personal changes that you can make, and then also expose them to the fact that, the more depressing side is 70% of all water use is for agriculture anyway, and so personal water use is somewhat limited. It's more the virtual water use that comes from, for example, eating meat. That's the elephant in the room. So we get both the broad kind of comparisons here, which are somewhat shocking, and then it also generates some pie charts that say, okay, well, if we're interested in drilling down in how much we're gaining with more efficient technology, where are those gains coming from? And I apologize for the color. Oh, actually, no, the colors are okay here. So where's the big gain? So I think it's like toilet technology has gotten a lot better, as illustrated in the blue part of this pie chart. So it goes from 6 gallons of flush to 1.3 gallons of flush. Shower is probably a bit better. It actually makes up more of the total. Anyhow, we would drill down further into some of these and have fodder for discussion. So this is one of the more simple. This would only be like a 10-minute activity in and of itself that would be housed alongside with a number of other kind of informative and discussion-oriented activities. Questions or comments on this one?
I'm very interested in linking this kind of data. So let's say you would use the Google map of Cape Town, and then you would have the sort of use data. Is there a way that you can also integrate in a map of the locations of the water? you'd map this data. I mean,
Oh, map this data?
let's say you're gonna have people fill out a form and then say, okay, where do you live? I mean, I know you have security issues and stuff, but let's say people accept and they put in their address.
Yeah.
So you'd have their address and their water usage so that you could map the location of that heavy water use, let's say in Cape Town.
Right.
Would you have to build that up? I mean, each one of those steps would be
That certainly gets more complicated. In the Google framework for that would be called the Fusion table, which links spreadsheet data to maps.
yes.
Is there now an automated like postal code to a Google map? So if you have people entering data for something and their postal code, is that linked now?
Alan, maybe you know better than I do. I would say it's Fusion table still is the only way that that's going to happen. As far as just having people enter in a bunch of data where postal code is one of the columns, the way to have that show up on a map would be through a Google Fusion table, which is I'm not showing any today because it's kind of I only sort of know how to use them. Or you just get into full-on geocoding in the GIS software.
For those of us who don't want to do that,
Then you send it to somebody. You send it to one of us and talk about it.
maybe I'll talk to someone.
Yeah. So there's still there's both democratization of these sort of processes, but there's still some room for just like people who do this as their job can probably help you out.
Megan Snow.
Yeah, Megan Snow is your first point of contact on this, exactly. Okay, well, so those were kind of the demos. I just want to show you a few of the other examples and just give a brief description because it goes beyond the Google Sheets stuff. So perhaps some of you have tried something like this before. I just call this my bottom-up lecture using Google Slides. And I've done this a few times, but this particular lecture was for a freshwater resources unit, and I had just had gum surgery that day, and the doctor said, you're not allowed to talk. And so it was kind of freeing in a way, because like, oh, sorry guys, I can't talk, you need to make the lecture. And so,
stand there and just like type stuff up.
well, so I put them all in groups.
Okay.
They all put their names on, or actually this time I put some questions on slides in advance, because I had an hour to like revamp this class and put some questions on there that I pulled from my own lecture, and then the students would go and they should have done some textbook reading beforehand anyhow, and they can go do some internet research, and they give them about 20 to 30 minutes, probably 20 minutes to put together slides that address what I'm saying are the key concerns for this period. And so they do a pretty good job of, if you give them enough guidance of putting together some slides. I mandate every slide has to have a figure that you can fully explain. It can't just be bullet points. They love bullet points. And it has to specifically address the question. And I have also done this poorly, where I did not give them enough guidance, and it just turned out to be a bunch of mediocre, if not outright wrong information. And that's one of the, kind of as you know, that's one of the problems with just like bottom-up generation of information in general, is that there needs to be some kind of system for verification. So in my case, that system is construct specific questions, and then I'm going to stand up here while they're presenting and likely, guide students. If things are going a little bit off the rails, I do try to help keep them on track. So sometimes this can go too far into the user-generated content realm, but this one worked pretty well.
So I
Yeah,
have a question.
Sure.
So you set it up by asking the question. They had the computer, so they went to the internet essentially and captured the images and then created their own slides.
Yeah.
But the sources of their information was the internet.
It was the internet and they were jumping off from their textbook chapter.
But they couldn't copy visuals.
That's right, that's right.
So the visuals came from the internet.
Right.
Okay.
So luckily, they're pretty quick on like going to the internet and borrowing, we'll say, imagery.
And did you ask them for attribution and all that kind of stuff?
Nah, not for this. This is too ephemeral, you know.
Okay, just wanted to.
Yeah, no, it's a good point though. If this were going to be something that would have a longer lifespan, then attribution would be key. And even still, it's probably not legal even with attribution. But we're okay when this stuff is just going to, you know, be presented in class and then nothing after that. Let's see, I'm gonna kind of try to hit the range of the functionality here before I go back to any other sheets. So the one that I remember from Google Docs, this may be my most experimental idea. And the one, so this was from last semester. The purpose here was to have a bit of a debate. So a point counterpoint on the future of agriculture. Should the future of agriculture be dominated by like science and technology, so GMO, agricultural intensification and mechanization, or should it be dominated by local, small-scale, organic, agroecological approaches? There's a ton of information on this. You know, it's a pretty hot topic, so it's easy to have a viewpoint and support it. And so for this one, the students had to write position papers. So half the class took each side. So they had done their research, they wrote a position paper, and then I put them into groups, as you can see here. And in class, in those groups, I gave them questions for which one group had an affirmative response, and the point, I guess. The other group had the counterpoint. And they were basically arguing this in semi-real time, but collecting their information in a document in a sort of, I call it the semi-synchronous agricultural debate. And it got kind of fun because it was kind of, you know, they were sort of lightly trolling each other there, and just but in an academic way. So, you know, group A puts in the point about farming techniques best for biodiversity. Group B puts in their counterpoint, and then group D, which wasn't even assigned that question, can interject additional points as they see fit. Like, oh, well, group B missed this important counterpoint. I'm going to throw that in there, and I can get points for my team. So this was like a scored activity. You get points for my team that way.
So which side won?
I don't remember which side won.
I bet AU, most of the students took A.
You'd be surprised because there's a lot of good pro-GMO information out there, actually. So it was more balanced than you might expect. So the lessons that I learned from this activity were that A, it worked better than I thought. B, I kind of having an assistant in the classroom, which I do in complex problems, was helpful because her job here was to make sure the document stayed organized, color-coded, and then everyone knew where to write stuff and it wasn't getting out of hand. C, this offered a better way for me to offer feedback than in a oral debate. So you can see here, I'm MGA. This is after the fact. I put in my feedback for the students, and this was about 20% of their grade on this paper/debate project. So those are the good parts. I would say the drawback was that this was born of, again, of like my own personal insecurities of not wanting to like do discussion-oriented things in class. And eventually, later on, I did an actual debate, like, you know, with words and people standing at lecterns and stuff. And that was probably better, ultimately. Like, most of the students preferred that. They had experiences with that in high school. They did a pretty good job at that. The information was probably not quite as good in that as it was in this, because they had more flexibility to think and refine their ideas. But I don't know, if I had to choose, I would probably choose the oral oral debate most of the time, but this had its upsides.
What was the timeline for this assignment?
Over, like, total,
What, did this occur in real time?
this was real time in class.
In class?
So this is about 45 minutes.
So there was some frantic typing going on.
Yep.
So every team had a computer, or everybody?
Everybody in my class has a computer, yeah.
So in the teams, they have the computers, and they would then all contribute, or they would make a decision as to, we're gonna put in these points.
Yeah, they would, probably most of the teams like designated, or here's, you focus on this area, you focus on this one. You are the interjection person, you're the one who's gonna scroll everyone else's writing and put in points. So they were pretty good. I think I might have I probably thought up 4 assignments within a group for them, but didn't prescribe them, just said, here's some thoughts about, one person can do this question, one person can do this one person can be the roving interjector, the other person can be the typer.
So you gave them the roles, you didn't.
I suggested, I didn't say that they had to do it. Yeah.
Were you able to tell in the written debate if certain students who would less likely speak up were more participatory or not necessarily? It wasn't easy to say.
It was a little tougher to tell, and so that's why I kept this as a fairly small percentage of their grade, because I wasn't sure how well I could suss that out.
I mean, I'd imagine that the introverted students would feel more comfortable with this
Yes.
format and might be a little bit more.
Yeah, so I think I have some recollection of that, of noticing various people participating more fully, but it's always a challenge to think about how to best quantify that.
Is it possible to track what, the students type more?
Yeah, but if you divide it up, so yes, but if they've assigned a typer, then the typer has done everything, but not necessarily, isn't doing all the intellectual contribution.
They're scrapped.
Right.
Did you have any students whose English wasn't so great and this was either easier or harder?
No, but that's a good point. You think, I don't know, would that be easier or harder? Yeah, I'd be curious to see, but they could focus more on gathering the data and then telling that to the scribe or something like that, if that was more comfortable for them. Questions? Okay, so yeah, this was the one that probably deviated the most from kind of quantification land. The one I did at the end of this complex problems class, as far as gathering feedback, because I sort of at some level threw a bunch of stuff at a wall to see what sticks as far as readings and activities. There was field trips, and so what you're seeing here is some instructions. So you're basing your entries on the effectiveness of each exercise, reading, co-curricular. So co-curricular is sort of like a out-of-class activity for those of you who are not in complex problems. While onerousness can be one criterion, it should not be the only one. Otherwise, we'd just be watching YouTube puppy videos. If an activity is somewhat onerous but supported course goals, then it should be kept or modified. And you can only vote to throw out 2 activities. So they put in the letters here. I kept this one was anonymous. They put in letters for each activity, whether they would keep it, K, modify it, M, or toss it, T. And once they did that, they're used to me at this point, so they did that really easily. And it generated this automatically. And so you can quickly see that your eye immediately goes to, save it. Yeah. The saving readings, which was not surprising. They were kind of long readings that were not actually as rich in relevant content as they should have been. And then given that we were all, we had a comfortable relationship, the students were not afraid to speak up and say, yeah, here's why I didn't like those. You can see that our trip to Freeport Harmony Farm near Catholic University was 100% success, a keeper. And then for all these yellow ones, because they didn't trash the activity, they also felt comfortable telling me, okay, well, so for Redline Rampage, which was this activity where I sent them out to monitor urbanization or development strategies along the red line, they liked that activity, but everybody thought, oh, you made us all go to the same 2 metro stops to judge the difference between Rockville and Twinbrook. So next time, could we all go to different metro stops to get a broader range of data? So that was, the kind of feedback that I sort of knew was coming, but it was nice to get it explicitly from them.
How many people were in the class?
Sorry?
What was the size of the class?
19.
Would you do this in combination with your sex?
I did it the same day, maybe.
So they understood this was really just for you, for that semester, the set, you kept that much, you didn't have to.
No, I did not add. I think complex problems has their own set of maybe questions that they add to it. But no, I did not add any of my own questions to that. This was, I prefer this because it's right then, and then they can talk to me right then. And it was actually a nice end of class.
What about the science articles and what man? Is that Michael Mann?
It's Charles Mann, who wrote like 1491 and has a really good book on, it's called The Wizard and the Prophet. It's about the future of everything. I don't know, energy, agriculture. Do you take a big technological approach or do you take small distributed approaches? So the Mann was pretty core reading. I don't know what the modifications were on that one. The science journal articles were just about ag, but I didn't give them enough prep to have the aptitude to read a science article. And so we will do that again, but there'll be more time invested in how you read a science article. So that's, that one. Again, I sort of knew these things, but I wanted to get it from the horse's mouth. So we just have a few minutes left. Let me see if there's any other ones we should look at. So I did a suburbanization in Gainesville, Virginia. This one is probably the most complicated one that I do. And it's sort of like the urbanization, except for the students they navigate to Gainesville, Virginia, which has had a lot of relatively recent, meaning in the 1984, in the imagery availability era. So it's interesting to watch in the Gainesville area. And then they have to, we're collecting data at a bunch of sample points as far as what the land cover used to be and what it is now. So was it forest and what did it change to? And then how does that relate to ecosystem change? So, more concrete leads to worse stormwater runoff, more water pollution, more heat island, worse air pollution, all that stuff is the context. And they collected the data, much like you did today, except using this historical imagery, and generated pie charts to show the change. So land cover in 1989 versus land cover in 2017, as you might expect, shows a trend from like forest and agriculture over to residential development and parking lots. There was some other stuff about measuring forest patch sizes in here too that I won't go into.
Are pie charts particularly easy to use in Google Sheets? Is it an analog with its own?
Yeah, they're easy and they're easy to interpret, I think is a nice thing.
How do you make the dots on the map in order to show us?
That's a bit more complicated story. There's probably other ways to do it, but I do it in ArcGIS, which is more of the kind of high-grade mapping software. And then I export those into Google Earth. You could just, again, if you can crowdsource, you have a group of students, everyone can just randomly put a dot on the map also. So there's other ways to get around this to avoid the use of software that you're not familiar with. But then they introduce bias, maybe. Probably doesn't matter. I'm happy to talk about any of these things later on in more detail, or you can copy any of these. You only have viewing permission for these, but you can copy them and then should have edit permissions of them. 5 minutes? 5 minutes more. So one more here that also, this was one that links in with readings pretty well. So I don't know if any of you have read Collapse by Jared Diamond, who also wrote Guns, Germs, and Steel. And so I used a couple of chapters from Collapse to demonstrate kind of failed or not failed societies. So based on societies overreaching perhaps, or some other factor leading to their demise, like Easter Island being kind of the most well-known and debated example. And so what we wanted to do was look at Google Earth imagery and say, from this imagery, can you determine how viable this area is and what sort of population it might be able to support, which is the whole idea of carrying capacity. And so we picked some Pacific islands, and the students, after some training, evaluated them in terms of some important factors, like connectivity to the outside world, tree cover, agriculture, access to fishing, and I think that was it. So just based on looking at something like this, but zooming in and kind of knowing what to look for. So, this is Pitcairn Island. You can sort of tell that it's a cliff-bound area. There's no airport. There is very little room for agriculture. It's very rocky, and thus it supports a permanent population of about 48 people. And so that was, on one extreme example. And then on the other extreme, you've got a place like Mangarepa, which is another Pacific island, but it's flat, it's beautiful, lots of access to fishing, you can grow coconuts everywhere. It's all very nice, and thus has a larger population. And so what we did was compare the kind of model estimates of what relative populations might be based on all of these scores. So, Pitcairn is really low. The model population was 20 people. Versus Easter Island is 1,000, simply because it's so much bigger. And we compared those to actual populations. And then you can say, okay, well, what are the determinants? Kind of unpack the determinants of carrying capacity. And then discuss all of the shortcomings with what we just did and the whole concept of carrying capacity to begin with. So again, I think I'll kind of leave it at the idea that I find that to do this, you have to be ready to have it be all kind of wrong, but useful. So the idea that all models are wrong, but sometimes they're useful, very much applies here, and have it then connect to a discussion about what worked well, what didn't, and focus on the process. So I will leave it at that. Thank you for attending.